Hi, Jay Fallon here for the Slippery Slope. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all the views, everything else, and hope you enjoy. Listen, a couple of things I want to run through, and I cannot believe that we're not discussing it a lot more. And that's the things that are happening over in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. We're seeing these nations go into financial ruin, and there's really not a lot of talk about it. And I believe it has a great amount of biblical importance, biblically relative, and that's why I can't believe we're not discussing it more. So I'll go through this first article. It's from the Economic Times, India. The headline says that Pakistan stares at bankruptcy as economic crisis worsens. So Pakistan is on the verge of bankruptcy as the country's economic situation is facing a dire future with no immediate positive outlook, despite ongoing negotiations between Islamabad and I wonder who they're negotiating with. Oh, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to resume the $6 billion buyout package from IMF. Because nothing ever goes wrong when you make a deal with IMF, does it? Not at all. So the Pakistani rupee, PKR, is on a free fall as it crossed 212 per US dollar on June 21, whereas Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves have depleted to a critical level and the country has less than 6 weeks of import cover remaining. The reserves are currently below $9 billion, according to a report published in Pakistan Tribune. So the Pakistani rupee has devalued by a massive 34%, or PKR 53.67 in the past year. In contrast, it closed at PKR 157.54 in June last year. As a result, Pakistani rupee has become Asia's worst performing currency in 2022, with a fall of nearly 16.5% since December 31st, 2001 against the US dollar. That put it at the bottom of a basket of 13 peers, including the Japanese yen, South Korean won, and Bangladeshi taka. So there's a lot more to that story, but that's what's basically going on in Pakistan. And if you haven't heard, Sri Lanka is in dire financial consequences at the moment. I'll read from this article. It's from the ABC News. Their headline says, gas lines and scuffles. Sri Lanka faces humanitarian crisis. So it says, a few years ago, Sri Lanka's economy was growing strongly enough to provide jobs and financial security for most. It's now in a state of collapse, dependent on aid from India and other countries as its leaders desperately try to negotiate a bailout with, who do you think? You guessed it, the International Monetary Fund. Funny enough, they're always there to help, to lend a helping hand, yes. What's happening in the South Asian island nation of 22 million is worse than the usual financial crisis seen in the developing world. It's a complete economic breakdown that has left ordinary people struggling to buy food, fuel, and other necessities, and has brought political unrest and violence. I'll go further down. It says that such disasters are more commonly seen in poorer countries, such as sub-Saharan Africa or in war-torn Afghanistan. In middle-income countries such as Sri Lanka, they are rarer but not unheard of. For example, 6 million Venezuelans have fled their oil-rich home country to escape a seemingly unending political crisis that has devastated the economy. So Indonesia, once touted as an Asian tiger economy, endured depression-level deprivation in the late 1990s that led to riots and political unrest and swept away a strong man who'd held power for 3 decades. The country now is a democracy and a member of the group of 20 biggest industrial economies. Sri Lanka's crisis is largely the result of staggering economic mismanagement combined with fallout from the pandemic, of course, pandemic always gets blamed, which along with 2019 terrorism attacks devastated its important tourism industry. The COVID-19 crisis also disrupted the flow of payments home from Sri Lankans working abroad. So the government has taken on big debts and slashed taxes in 2019, depleting the treasury just as COVID-19 hit. Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves plummeted, leaving it unable to pay for imports or defend its beleaguered currency, the rupee. So here we see, so yeah, Sri Lanka's just gone. Okay, they have collapsed completely. And Pakistan's trying to do this deal again with the IMF. Now, the reason why I believe this is of such great biblical importance, the Bible talks about in Revelation 17 about 10 kings, 10 kings who are basically kind of, they're in power for 1 hour, ruling the world, and then they all give their power over to, I think it's the, they give their power over to the Antichrist. See if I can find that and read it to you. But actually, it's Revelation 17, verse 12. It says, "The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb. The Lamb will overcome them." So why I think all this is of one importance, earlier on the Bible talks about, in Revelation also, talks about the global system that the beast, the Antichrist and the false prophet all bring into fulfillment. They want this one world system, this one governmental system. They want to control such a ironclad rule that they'll be able to dictate who buys and who sells, and obviously you have to have the mark of the beast and all this kind of thing. However, the reason why I'm relating all this back to what's happening in Pakistan and in Sri Lanka, the way I see it, if the only way that you're able to bring about all this, bring about such tight rule upon the whole world with the one world government and with the world economic system, you have to really destroy the economic system that's already there. Hello, what does that mean? Have you heard of the Great Reset? The whole Klaus Schwab thing, the World Economic Forum, where he says, hey, you'll own nothing, but you'll be happy. It's all good. But the problem is for you to own nothing, for me to no longer own anything, but I'll still be happy. Someone still has to own it. And the whole thing is, at the moment, you have all these countries which dictate, they have control over their own economies. But if the beast system, the Antichrist system is going to come into, going to be fulfilled, which it will be, someone has to take it over. Someone has to take over the economies of every nation. I believe we're going to see the collapse. Some will collapse, others will just give it over, their economies. But we're going to see more and more of these collapses of the finances of each nation. We've seen it in Sri Lanka. Venezuela is still in the mess, as it said. We're seeing it happening in Pakistan. Sri Lanka really amazes me because, like they said, that wasn't the kind of financial nation that it was before. It had a really bright future ahead of it just a couple of years ago, and now we're seeing it on the verge of collapse. IMF's, the International Monetary Fund steps in, says, "Hey, here you go." What happens when you just create further debt that you can't repay? Someone comes along and says, well, hey, I just come along and I'll just take over your debt completely, wipe it all, but I own your country. The Great Reset. This is one of the ways I think they're going to introduce the Great Reset globally. All these countries that can't pay their debt, all these countries that collapse financially, they'll just say, well, we'll just take over. We just own your country. You no longer own anything. We own it all. We'll just rent it back to you. We'll just give it back to you. But you can't buy and sell. Someone else steps in and say, well, we've got all these 10 rulers and they own the whole world. Maybe this one person, this one government should take over the whole thing. But you can't buy and sell unless you take my mark on my hand, on your right hand, your forehead. We're seeing Bible prophecy from over 2,000 years ago. We've seen the foundations for it laid. for ages now. But we're seeing the fulfillment of it all coming into action. The enemy, the Antichrist system, Satan basically is trying to bring in the system that he wants. Luckily, the Bible already said this is going to happen. Don't be caught by surprise. None of what I'm saying is meant to, scare you or give you any kind of fear. All I'm saying is the Bible already said all these things. I believe that as Christians, we need to be aware of what's happening and where the world is going. And also, when non-Christians come to us and have these questions, you need to be able to say, well, hey, this is what the Bible said. And look, the Bible said we're going to end up at this point. And we can see this system, we can see the world governmental system moving us towards this point now. We can see it's going to be fulfilled. All these things the Bible said. And that's really a reason to rejoice. However, you can't stick your head in the sand like a lot of people I know just stick their head in the sand. They don't want to know about it. Can't stick your head in the sand. You need to understand what's going on. You need to be a little wise. Take precautions if you can. And warn other people and be able to tell other people when they ask questions. That's my opinion. I hope this is helpful. I hope you like the red beanie. Thank you for listening to the slippery slope.